Across the Atlantic Ocean, another key figure was getting his start in the infant filmmaking industry, Edwin S. Porter. Porter started off as a Vitascope projectionist, setting up the first Edison projector in Koster and Bial's Music Hall in New York City in April of 1896. For a few years, he operated his own equipment until 1900, when he joined Edison Manufacturing Company and became head of production for Edison's Skylight Studio in 1901. For the next 5 years, he served as Edison's go-to director and cameraman. Porter's projectionist background gave him some unique insight into film. Greatly influenced by the work of Georges Méliès, especially 1902's A Trip to the Moon, Porter decided to try his hand at a narrative film with 1903's Life of the American Fireman. Firemen were common subject matter for early films, but what Porter did was rather unique. He took stock footage from the large Edison library and spliced it together with staged scenes to create a fictional narrative. Porter was still stuck in this tableau mentality, constructing each shot as a complete scene. Temporal overlaps, that's where action is duplicated from one shot to the other, were common, as in this opening shot where the firemen all rush down the pole, followed by a shot at the bottom of the pole before the firemen land. Now, to our modern sensibilities, that looks like a mini flashback. Porter does this again in the fire rescue, first showing the drama from inside the building, and then moving outside, showing the same exact rescue from the perspective of the firemen. And Porter himself would push the narrative envelope a little bit further by the end of 1903 with his next big film, The Great Train Robbery. Now here Porter is more decisive in his cutting. Although each scene is still one master take, he cuts straight between the scenes without using fades or dissolves, and, most importantly, without letting the scene reach its logical end. Porter was beginning to forge a new cinematic language. Through his work, we start to see that the most basic unit of cinema was not the scene, as Méliès and his contemporaries thought, but the shot. Meaning came not only of the spatial arrangement of objects and actors in a frame, like it does in theater and in still photography, but in the way that shots are arranged in time. But like Georges Méliès before him, Porter would only take editing so far. Cinema would require another artist to build on their work and expand the editing vocabulary. And in one of those serendipitous moments of history, Porter would inspire just that artist. In 1908, just before leaving Edison to start his own production company, Porter hired a young, starving actor to fill the lead part in Rescued from an Eagle's Nest. This would end up being the first break of a 40-year-long career for one David Wark Griffith. The seventh child of a Confederate Army colonel from a rural district in Kentucky, David Wark Griffith tried everything from hop picking, selling encyclopedias door to door, to acting. His lifelong ambition was to be a writer, falling in love with Victorian style of literature, especially that of Charles Dickens. But Griffith's own plays and poems were rather unremarkable. Acting on advice from a friend, Griffith tried his hand at writing scenarios for movie production companies. Working under the stage name Lawrence Griffith, he submitted an adapted play to none other than Edwin S. Porter. Porter rejected it for having way too many scenes, but he hired the young, handsome Griffith to star in one of his films. Well, that's when the filmmaking bug bit. Griffith found a position at Biograph, a production company struggling with debt but looking for directors. After directing a single reel, The Adventures of Dolly, which was shot in 2 days, Griffith was given a $45 a week director's contract. Now, under contract to Biograph, Griffith would make over 450 films from 1908 to 1911, pushing cinema out of the primitive tableau mentality and into a multi-shot medium that we would now recognize. One of Griffith's first inventions was the cut-in, first used in The Greaser's Gauntlet in 1908, just 4 months after his first film for Biograph. Griffith cut from a medium-long shot of a hanging tree to a full shot in the middle of the scene to emphasize the emotional impact of an exchange between two actors, a brand new concept. Griffith continued to experiment with alternating shot lengths, using multiple camera setups to create a scene through what's called continuity editing. Now, continuity editing is cutting between shots with the purpose of maintaining a smooth sense of continuous space and time. With multiple camera setups being used, the 180-degree rule evolved out of practice. Griffith, as well as his contemporaries, discovered that if you kept the camera on one side of the axis of action, that's the imaginary line where movements and eye lines occur, you can avoid continuity problems of confusing geography when cutting from one angle to another. Now, Griffith's next invention in editing would be one that had become his favorite: intercutting or cross-cutting. Bouncing between two different scenes in parallel action, which he first put to use in After Many Years based on the poem Enoch Arden, showing a shipwrecked man and the woman he left at home. Now, this is commonplace in today's cinema language, but wholly new at the time. Biograph's managers thought the experiment was dangerous and would be confusing to the public, but Griffith stood firm, likening the technique to the writing styles of Dickens. It paid off. After Many Years was hailed as a masterpiece. Griffith upped the ante again in 1909 with The Lonely Villa, intercutting between three parallel actions: a woman held up in a house, robbers trying to break in, and a husband rushing home to rescue. Griffith amps up the tension by continuously building up the tempo of the cuts faster and faster to get to the ultimate cinematic climax. Through varying the spatial distance with long, medium, and close-up shots and the temporal length of the shot, Griffith began to establish the tenets of classic Hollywood continuity editing. Through practical problem-solving experimentation, he and contemporary filmmakers who often copied his style brought about concepts like the establishing shot, reverse shots, matching eye lines, everything that we think about in terms of continuity editing. Now, by 1911, Griffith was ready to pursue bigger and more ambitious projects, more ambitious than the managers of Biograph could stomach. Even in the birth of cinema, the first 20 years of filmmaking, the history of editing has been a story of filmmakers learning from each other and adding their own voice into the mix. Cinema was becoming a language, and editing was the syntax. Learn it, use it, and go make something great.